Recently, I had the pleasure of traveling to both Samoa and Fiji as part of a new documentary created in collaboration with Sounds New Zealand and my production company, Campfire Studios. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of going overseas to shoot a documentary, the planning and equipment we used, and how we chose to capture footage like this. Now the film is still very much in production, so I can't get too much into the specifics of the documentary except in very broad strokes. This is an 8-part docu-series. The doc is about the native instruments of the Pacific Islands, or more specifically, native instruments of the Pacific that are being lost to time. Through the doco, we hope to celebrate and even revive these instruments so that their stories and sounds can be preserved for future generations. First of all, let's talk about cameras. Now, for this shoot, we used two Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6Ks. One, the 6K Pro for our A cam, and the 6K G2 for our B cam. Now, you might be questioning why we would use these specific cameras for documentary work. They don't have autofocus, there's no IBIS, battery life is terrible, they're data hungry, and of course, they're kind of tricky to rig up. But actually what might be their biggest downside is also their biggest upside, and that's the amount of data they capture when you're filming in B-RAW at 6K. To be perfectly honest, there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not we should film on something easier, such as my Sony a7S III may be paired with a Sony FX6, which is sort of the quintessential go-to for doc filmmakers at the moment. We filmed a series of tests with both cameras along with a Canon C70 and Ursa 12K just to see how they all looked and compared. And yes, the Sonys would be much easier to film on, but easier does not mean better. And while you get much smaller file sizes and a much easier shooting style with the luxuries of autofocus, these cameras can't shoot RAW. And I'm also of the opinion that they do not provide a very cinematic image. Whereas the Blackmagics shoot a beautiful image in B-RAW that gives you much more latitude in post-production. They're also 6K resolution, not 4K, giving you more opportunity to adjust and reframe shots should you need to. But ultimately the choice came down to how they render skin tones. And I think Blackmagic really do a very nice job on skin tones, and I think Sony doesn't. I think Sony provides a much more digital image while Blackmagic has a much more filmic feel, which looks much more interesting with much less work in post-production. Now this is just my opinion, and you can disagree with me, but look at some of this imagery and tell me when I'm telling lies. So we committed to larger file sizes and a more difficult shooting process to get a more interesting, unique, and yes, cinematic image. And with the A camera, we also had the Tilta Mirage with its variable ND filter and pure mist filter to further soften the image. And on the B cam, I was using the Nieu True Color 1 to 5 stop variable ND filter and a 1/8 black Pro Mist. To help minimize cabling, we filmed on CFast cards, and we used the 7-inch OC monitor for the A cam and the Atomos Shinobi 5-inch monitor for the B cam. and I'll put details to all of this gear down in the description. In terms of camera rigs, I stumbled across this very economical system using a few small rig pieces. First you take this small rig rod mount and add screw-on rods for extensions. Then you add this small rig V-mount adapter, and the adapter can then power your camera and monitor from its dual D-tap connections while remaining very small and compact. This is attached to a base plate and a small rig pocket 6K cage, then a NATO clamp to attach the top handle, and voila, cinema. We had 6 of these 160 watt hour V mounts plus 2 of my Core X Micro 95 watt hour batteries, and normally one of each would power the respective cameras and monitors for between half a day and a whole day. The other key ingredient to get the look we wanted for this documentary was our lens selection, and in this case we used my vintage Leica Almarit R lens set, which I had modded using SimMod adapters to EF mount. Now, I've talked about my love of these Leica lenses, and the more I compare them to other lenses, the more eager I am to use them. There's just something about the way they pair with a 6K camera like the Pocket 6K or Red Komodo, which is kind of hard to beat. You take off the digital edge, but you keep the creamy, beautiful rendering and skin tones. Now again, these lenses are far from perfect and are not particularly easy to film with. I mean, this is an older set from the 1970s. Some of the glass has blemishes and haze. The focus and iris rings are stiff, but it was absolutely worth the effort and sacrifice to create the rich look that they provided. The lenses I bought for the trip were the 24mm, the 35, 50, and 90mm. Generally speaking, the A cam would always be on the 24mm, while the B cam would always be on the 50mm, providing the opportunity to get both wider shots and close-ups quickly. I did occasionally use the 90mm and 35, but if we only took the 24 and 50, we would have been generally happy with the coverage they provided. We also had the opportunity to use the DJI Mini 3 Pro drone for wide and establishing shots, and would frequently put this up in the air whenever we had a spare moment. The great thing about this drone is its size and weight makes it very small and inconspicuous, and we brought it with the Fly More combo to allow multiple flights in a day, and found we never really got through the 3 batteries when filming. We did take a Sony a7S III and the DJI RS3 gimbal for backup, but ultimately they were never required. For capturing audio, we had 3 shotgun microphones, the Sennheiser ME66 as the general shotgun mic recording scratch audio, which stayed on the A camera, the Sennheiser MKH5048 as our boom mic for recording sit-down interviews where possible, the Deity S-Mic 2S as the onboard shotgun mic for the B camera scratch audio, and also to act as a backup for the Sennheiser 5048 in interview situations. And we used a set of Rode mic go-tos to capture our interviews and any pieces to camera. Generally, when setting up for an interview, we would try and boom the shotgun mic overhead and use the Rode mic go-tos as our backup audio. However, many of the environments we were filming in didn't really allow for us to set up that overhead boom, so the radio mic was often our main audio track. Now, this documentary was very much run and gun, and from day to day, we didn't know who or where we might be conducting an interview. And this meant we opted to record the audio internally into the cameras rather than have a separate audio recorder and another piece of equipment to monitor. In an ideal scenario, we would be running audio into a mixer, but in the interest of keeping our kit smaller and more mobile, we opted to feed the audio into the cameras, which do have decent preamps, and monitor it from there. For lighting, we also went with a very minimal kit. Our biggest challenge was deciding how much we could take with us, knowing that essentially we had 1 oversized bag and 3 regular sized pieces of luggage that could hold all of our filming equipment. We chose 2 flat panel lights, the Amaran F22C and F21C, and one would serve as our key light while the other would be backlight or fill light. Flat panels are easy to store, lightweight, don't take up too much space, and offer pretty soft light without requiring a massive softbox. We also use the Aperture 60X for a spotlight, but sometimes even as a key light just to bring up the levels on our talent when we were outside in bright sunny conditions. Because we were filming in remote areas and in places that didn't always have power, we selected lights that could all be powered using V-mounts. This meant for quick setups, and we could use a V-mount rather than cable everything. This allowed us more lighting flexibility and the opportunity to set up our lights much more quickly in a range of different environments. We would try and add a bit of lighting to any piece to camera or interview setup. However, there were just some instances where we had to rely on natural light to allow our subjects to be able to express themselves and still feel comfortable. All of these lights, along with some light stands, could comfortably fit inside our oversized lighting bag for travel. For our crew, we had a modest 3-person crew. My longtime director photographer, Isaac Nieu, ran the A cam and set up our lights. I ran B cam and set up sound, and my producer Will would help with general setup and getting those epic drone shots. Our setup time for any interview was between 5 and 30 minutes on average. A lot of our role was reacting to the environment around us and trying to find visually interesting B-roll wherever we were filming to help immerse the audience in the world of the people we spoke to. Often what we captured would be quite spontaneous as we stopped in different places and asked locals if we could film with them. Isaac would concentrate on wide shots while I would look to capture those close-ups. This meant we could cover a scene, a person, or a location quickly and efficiently. Also, when you're filming in an environment like this, wherever you turn the camera on, you can't help but find something beautiful to capture. So the unplanned nature of our daily filming didn't prevent us from finding some beautiful moments. We shot a mixture of slow motion at 48 frames per second and a regular 24 frames. I also shot some footage at 2.7K resolution at 120 frames per second. And normally I try and avoid this mode because it crops so much into the sensor. However, what I found on this shoot is that sometimes it can be very usable, and this crop in can actually help when you're on a prime lens. This is the quickest way to capture some tighter action shots as long as your environment is well lit enough. Now, one of the biggest challenges of being away for the 2 weeks of filming was making sure we had enough hard drive space to fit all the video we were capturing. We were filming B-RAW 6K 12:1, which is the most compressed version of B-RAW, but even so, most days we would still be capturing over 500 gigs of data. We ended up with just under 5 terabytes of data. So my first concern was, how do we store that and how do we back that up while we're on these islands? I ended up bringing four 4 terabyte SSD drives, which amounted to 16 terabytes in total, which I needed to be confident would back up our footage at least twice over. I used the internal SATA Samsung QVO 870 SSD drives with a SATA to USB-C cable to connect them to my computer. These SSDs are considerably cheaper than those made for external use. Their transfer speeds are not super quick, but definitely still much quicker than spinning disk drives, which would also be much more prone to data loss and corruption. I felt this was a good middle ground. Now, each evening we would copy over the day's footage to 2 hard drives, and then we would check through the footage on each hard drive to make sure it had duplicated correctly. So we had to add between 2 to 3 hours to our evening routine for this process. Overall, it was a pleasure working on this doc in such beautiful environment, and we are very pleased with how the footage has turned out thus far. I hope you've enjoyed this look at our work on the documentary so far, and if you're interested in learning the entire process of documentary filming from start to finish, you can check out my documentary masterclass course, which takes you step by step through completing a feature documentary from start to finish in great detail. Links in the description below. You can also watch the full documentary that was created for the masterclass in its entirety here on my channel. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you.